Hey everybody, it's Leroy from Leroy Gaming, and today I am bringing you my comprehensive Starfield complete ship building guide. If you watch this video, you should know everything that there is so that you can get the most out of your ship building endeavors. We will be covering skills for ship building. I'm going to share with you all the key early locations to build, including my recommendation for the best place to build your ships. I'm gonna go over with you step by step the shipbuilding process that I know can be intimidating. We're gonna go over everything from controls to building a ship from the ground up. Now please note that this guide is quite comprehensive and long, so feel free to utilize the timestamps below to get to the sections that most interest you at any given time. That being said, please drop a like if you find this video helpful. And now let's go ahead and check out how to effectively build ships in Starfield. Okay, we will start by taking a look at the skills that are related to shipbuilding. There are only two, and do note, to start shipbuilding, you do not need to have these. They will come into play when you're trying to make more of the larger and more complicated ship designs. The first skill you will want to take a look at is piloting. Piloting has 4 ranks, and only rank 3 and 4 have anything to do with shipbuilding. They're going to let you pilot and also create Class B ships and Class C ships, which will utilize Class B modules and Class C modules. Do note that the way you rank this up is by killing ships in combat, so you might as well start unlocking this at an early level. This way you don't have to grind later to unlock rank 3 and rank 4. The only other skill that is involved with shipbuilding is Starship Design. Starship Design is a tier 3 tech skill. Do note that this means it requires for you to put a minimum of 7 points across tier 1 and tier 2 before this unlocks. And Starship Design lets you install better and better ship modules. This will become a bigger deal as you try and make some of the larger and more complex designs. Do note that there is also a social skill that is related to shipbuilding indirectly. It doesn't impact what you build, but it does impact how you can get the most out of each ship, and that is the tier 3 skill under social called Ship Command. And this does mean that you need to put 11 points into social categories and skills before you can unlock it. What Ship Command allows you to do is to have more than 3 active crew members connected to your ship. Rank 1 lets you have 4 active crew members and then goes up to 5, 6, and 8. And for those of you that don't know, this is the ship crew interface. Right now, baseline, you'll notice I have 3 companions that are assigned to my ship, and this is the most I can have assigned. I have to improve that ship command skill to unlock more. When you equip a companion to your ship, it will highlight in white which skills. So this does mean, for example, if you have Barrett assigned to your ship, you get the equivalent of Starship Engineering 4. So you do not need to have that on your character to get the full benefits. And there are a variety of characters out there that will help you getting the most out of certain types of weapons, like here the particle beam weapon systems, potentially getting the most out of ship traveling of astrodynamics with Sarah. Vasco is also another great example where you're going to get more out of your shield system, and so forth and so forth. In the end, it means you can get away with putting less points towards ship related skills in your build and relying on your companions to do the dirty work. Okay, next let's talk about where you can go to build ships early and mid game. The first location will be in New Atlantis, where you're going to get to talk to the ship technician, and you will be introduced to this via the main quest. The other really early location is going to be in Aquila City, where you also talk to a ship technician. This will be in the Cheyenne star system. Now there are 3 other locations that I want to point out. Another good location is found in the Valo system, and this is on the planet of Polvo, where we find Hope Tech headquarters. Now this is basically the Space Trucker brand. If you build from here, you're going to find that their components are going to focus more on sturdy ships that have a lot of high cargo capacity, and cosmetically you can quite literally make your ships look like a giant tanker. So if you want it to look like a space freighter, this is a good brand to focus on. There are also 2 star yards that you're going to get access to early in the game. The first one is the Deimos brand star yard in Seoul. Do note in general that at the star yards, you're going to have more options when it comes to building components. And then the second star yard that you're going to get access to, and you're going to be introduced to it through the story, is the Stroud Eklund star yard. And this is in the Narion system. And this brand is all about luxury interiors. So if you want a ship that looks a little more fancy and more expensive, this is a brand that you can take a look at. Now, if you want to get access to arguably the best possible location for building a ship, where you're going to get the greatest amount of variety of options, then I'm about to show that to you right now. In Star Citizen, you can build your own outposts, and you can do this by landing on almost any planet out there in locations that are outside of preset areas. So for example, if you're looking at a planet like this showing the resources, you can quite literally click anywhere on here and then travel to it, and you're gonna land in this area. It's gonna have a preset area where you can build in, and when you do that, it's gonna look kind of like this. So here I am landed on this moon, and if you hit F for your little scanner, you can go ahead and press R, and it allows you to place this marker. Once you place it, it literally creates a perimeter where you can build. You can go ahead and hit V to toggle the view, and then zoom out. You'll notice the circle is where you can build. And now, here's the beautiful thing. You can go ahead and hit Tab for build mode. And if you go ahead and change the categories in the upper right hand corner by hitting Z or C, so you want to go ahead and shift over to miscellaneous. And then if you scroll down, there's landing pad with shipbuilder. Now what's really interesting here is you can place this down, and what you need is 18 adaptive frames, 30 iron, 2 beryllium, and 2 zero wires. These are not rare and they're easy to get. And once you place them, here's the best part. You do not need anything to operate with this. You do not need to get any power, which is a little odd, but I'm going to show you right now. If you go up here to the very top, you're going to see that there is a shipbuilding control console. Again, does not need power. I don't know how that works, but if you click on it, it lets you buy ships, and there's some nice options here, but you're also going to be able to view and modify ships. And this overall will give you the greatest amount of components across all of the categories. So unless you want to build very specific brand where you would want to go to their respective headquarters or star yards, then this is the absolute best place to build out your ships. Now I do want to make this guide as accessible as possible, so I will go ahead and do the rest of the tutorial here at the New Atlantis location and the parts that you will get access to here. So all you have to do is go ahead and talk to the ship service technician here. And if you want to build out ships, you're actually going to want to go to view and modify my ships. Now, here is the frustrating reality about shipbuilding in Starfield right now. Believe it or not, you technically cannot just build a ship from the ground up. You can buy ships or get them in the game through either doing quests or stealing them. So the most traditional way of quote unquote building a ship would be picking one of your ships and editing them. Now I'm going to be working with the Frontier, which is your starter ship. Right here you see a moderately modified version of that ship. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to strip this Frontier of the components that I had created to customize it. And then we're going to, for the most part, go from the ground up how you could modify the Frontier. The reason you may not necessarily want to strip everything down and start from zero scratch is it would require you to sell all the components here, and you're getting pennies on the dollar when you sell items back to the vendor basically. So if you can salvage or utilize any of the components, then will benefit you. This does mean if, for example, you got a ship like the Razor Leaf, if you wanted to have something that is based loosely on this design, you can instead, for example, start modifying this down or break it down of all the parts you don't need and then build up. There are of course a ton of other ships, but again, I want to make this as simple as I can for beginners. So I'm going to start with a ship that everybody will have for free, which is the Frontier. Alright guys, so for starters, when you are under the edit your ship section, you need to hit B to enter ship building. Do not hit the button for ship upgrades. That will only let you upgrade the various weapon systems, shielding, engines, etc. But it will not allow you to change the physical layout of the ship. Now what you see here is me kind of taking apart Lego style and separating a lot of the components of the beginner ship. For now and for tutorial purposes, please ignore all of these parts on the outside. You want to focus on the center. This will be the equivalent of us building from the ground up. In this example, I will be using some of the components that you start with if you were to strip down or edit down your starter ship, again, to make this easier for everybody. Now, I did want to spend a moment to discuss controls in this interface. You can use WSAD to quite literally move horizontally and vertically. And then if you want to move in the Z axis, which will be important, that's going to be either hitting F to kind of go down or R to go up, because you can't have multiple layers of ships, and this is going to be important. You can also right click and hold, then you move around to look in a circle, and you can use your mouse wheel to zoom out and zoom in. Note, this is not actually going up and down the Z axis. It's only for viewing your ship. I also want to go over the interface a little bit. In the upper left hand corner, it's going to give you the energy requirements for your ship. Once you select an actual reactor, it'll show you the total amount of energy allocation that you have that you can utilize across the 3 different weapon systems, W0, 1, and 2, and you can fully customize this. This area here shows how much power can go towards engines. Don't mind that it's red right now. This one area is for shields. We haven't picked the shield yet, so it's not showing anything. And then your GRAV drive is this last one. At the bottom, you're going to see the relative power of your weapons, the power rating for your particle weapons, ballistic weapons, and missiles. You're also going to see your hull strength, your shield strength, your cargo capacity, how many crew members you can have actually working on stations, your jump range, and this is the maximal amount of distance that you can jump in one single jump. Your relative mobility rating, that's quite literally how agile your ship is. Do note, Class A ships, which is what we're going to be looking at this tutorial, are really meant to be heavily mobile. And then Class B ships are going to be in between, and Class C, it is normal for them to be kind of really tough and large, but they're going to have low mobility, and that's okay. Your top speed, and do note top speed is only if you were to allocate to your engines fully. So if your top speed is 150, but you only put half of your engine allocation, then for example, your top speed may really only be 75. And then finally, your mass. Now for now, don't really worry about the color coding system because everything is spread out apart, and there's a bunch of error systems here because this is not a legal ship, obviously. but I will explain these as we go through the tutorial. All right, we're gonna start our design by looking at the landing bay. You can either utilize the one that comes with your ship, which is the NG6 landing bay by Nova Galactic, or you can pick your own. So if you're using the one that you start with, just make sure that when it's selected and when you move it around, there's a green at the bottom. This means it's touching the ground. If for some reason you've messed with verticality, like this, if I hit R, notice now it's red, it's too high. So you need to hit F till you get to where it turns green and drop it. Now, if you want to pick a different one, you can select it and hit delete. If you make a mistake and you said, oh man, I didn't mean to delete that because I'm getting pennies on the dollar returned here, you can always hit Control, and you'll notice you can hit Z for undo or Y to redo. So if I go Control Z, it's back. And if I said, oh man, actually I did want to get rid of that, Control Y. So anytime you're doing any build, if you make a stupid mistake, remember, hit Control and then Z to redo your last action. So if you made a mistake at any point in your build, make sure you can hit. So if you made a mistake at any point in your build, remember you can always hit Control and then Z to undo your last move. Now let's say you did want to delete this and wanted to see what your other options are. You can go ahead and hit delete, then make sure your mouse is in the general space where you want to place something and hit G for add. And then make sure you're in the base category. If you're in the wrong area, you could Q or T to get there. And you notice here we have two different options at this location. Other locations will have other brands. For the most part here, you'll notice they have slightly different values and mass, and then there's a big cosmetic difference. So you can go ahead and pick whichever one you want. For intents and purposes, we'll go ahead and stay with the one that we started with. So here I'm going to go Control and Z to undo that destruction. Now when you mouse over this component or any other component, you're going to notice that there's little squares and circles around, and these are attach points. So what that means is you can go ahead and click and drag any other component, and if you have them the right spot, they will just attach on top of them, for example. The game will do its best to snap together the pieces. But let's say you want it to get to the bottom. If you're having struggling, like if this wasn't connecting, you can always go like this and then manually hit F to lower it to get in the right position. And in this case, all these little areas, you'll notice they have the little circles. They look like little doors and kind of arrows pointing towards them. That means these are walkable potential areas. Now for the purpose of this video, we're gonna assume you're kind of starting from scratch. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this. And what we wanna do is we wanna build off the starting landing bay spot. Now we're gonna build wherever we mouse over the nearest connector. So here if we mouse over this connector in the back of the landing bay and hit G, it's gonna come up with options that are viable to be put here. You can change from category to category through Q and T. Please go over to HABs if you're not there already. That's where we're gonna start. Now, key things to note here. Think of this as building with Legos. Two things right away, you're gonna notice that there's gonna be different brands. So in this case, we have Deimos and Nova. And the different brands, not only do they look cosmetically different, but they may also have different building options. Different brands have different specializations. For now, as a starter, what you care about is the size of each one of these building blocks. They can either be 1 by 1 size, that's why it says 1 by 1 here, 2 by 1, or 3 by 1. And each of the brands is going to have those categories. Now do note, in other locations, especially star bases, or if you build a large landing pad on your settlement, you're going to have even bigger components that could be 2 by 2 or even 2 by 3. In addition to the different sizes, there's going to be different versions of each component. Now as an example, we're going to be looking with a Nova setup. While you can mix and match the different brands without issue, For this tutorial, I'm going to try and keep a Nova theme just for the looks. Now notice that certain components are only going to have one version, like this Nova Galactic Frontier 2x1. There are no little lines beneath that descriptor. However, if you look at the 1x1, there's 2 lines. So if you hit the left arrow or right arrow here, it will cycle through them. In this case, the difference between a storeroom and companionway is completely cosmetic. However, if you look at the 2x1s, there's going to be a variety of different ones, and I'll give you a quick rundown. Also, different brands may have different options. Notice the 3x1 option for Nova, there's only one. But if you go under Dymos, you're going to notice there's multiple ones, the all-in-one, engineering bay, living quarter, etc. So do note those differences. Now we are going to go by sticking with Nova, as I mentioned, and I'm going to be giving you a couple recommendations here so that you can be functional. You can of course design your ship however you want. Now before we look at the different options here and what they do for you, I do want to explain a little bit of the information interface on the left. Each item is going to have a variety of information. You're going to have the cost, the mass, which is how much the items weigh, and then here you're going to have hull, which again increases the hit points of your ship, and then sometimes they will have additional information here, namely passenger slots, or rather crew stations. Now what is the difference? Crew stations is the amount of actual companions you can add to the ship and have them actively provide your skill benefits. Now do note, regardless of how many crew stations you install on your ship, baseline you can only equip 3 companions. You're going to have to increase a certain social skill in order to get 4 or more. Do check the timestamps below to go back to the skill section to learn more about that. Now the passenger slots is for something completely different. There are missions out there in the world that will tell you that you need to transport a certain amount of either traders, researchers, etc. to new locations. And the amount of passenger slots you have on your ship need to equate that number. So if you need to transport 2 traders, you can equip this galactic armory, for example, and that will meet those needs. But if you needed 3, you may have to put an additional habitat in order to equal to 3 or more in order to be able to do that. Now, let's take a look at the actual types, because there are also some functional differences on some of these. The all-in-one berths that you find are going to be cosmetic in general. They're not going to have any functional elements in them. The armory does the same exact thing, but now it's going to have a physical armory. So you're going to have boxes where you can put equipment in, kind of stands where you can show off your armor, places where you can quite literally place weapons and you're going to physically be able to see them. The captain's quarter is nice because it's going to give you a bed where you can rest and get your rest bonus. We'll go over that in just a little bit. The computer core gives you a crew station, but nothing really functional. The control station's the same way, but it literally looks like a little control center with multiple areas where crew members can sit down. Now notice it is crew station 4. So you can have up to 4 crew members be equipped, but do note you still need to meet that skill requirement to get more than 3. The infirmary is interesting because it's going to actually provide you not only a cosmetic look like an infirmary, but it's also going to have a research computer that you can research certain texts and items, and you're also going to have a pharmaceutical station for crafting pharmaceuticals. The living quarter is cosmetically going to look quite literally like a living quarter and add the passenger slots. Science lab is very similar functionally to an infirmary, but it does have passenger slots. So the infirmary does not. The science lab has the passenger slots. It also has the research computer as well as the pharmacy workstation. So from a functional standpoint, this is a little bit better, but you may cosmetically want an infirmary on your ship, and that's fine. And then you have your workshop, which is probably the most useful habitat because it does give you 2 passengers, but it also gives you all of the other 4 workstations. So if you want to craft weapons, if you want to craft components, if you want to craft spacesuits, etc., they're all going to be one nice spot for you. Now I'm going to give you right now a recommended build out to be functional and accessible, but do note you can get as creative as you want to be here. So in this example, if we want to be as functional as possible while keeping cost and mass down, we're going to go ahead and start by actually putting a science lab as the first spot here. So go ahead and hit E to accept. And so now remember, you're going to have 2 passenger slots on your ship. You're also going to get the pharmaceutical station and the research station. Go ahead and hit E. Next, we want to build directly above that. So mouse over the back little slot here and then hit G to add. We want to go ahead and create the workstation here. And I know this is a little off point, which is fine. Go ahead and hit E to place it. And now you can kind of click and drag to lift up and move it over. And then we want to put one more habitat here. So go ahead and hit G again. And we actually, in this case, want to get the captain's quarter. And again, do the same thing here. Hit E to place, move it back. There we go. So at this point, functionally, you're going to have the science lab. So if you need to do research or pharmaceutical production, you're good here. You're going to be able to move upwards. And here you're going to have passenger slots, but really all your workstations. Then you could move forward towards where you're going to have the cockpit in a moment. And you can go and sleep in your bed nice and quick to get your rest EXP bonus. And that's everything you need to have a super functional beginner ship when it comes to habitats. Now next we actually want to add a cockpit. Now this is the one that comes with your ship, and so you can literally move this over if you want, or again you can click on the front here, hit G, cycle through to where you see cockpits and add them, but in this case we'll go ahead and just move it. So I'm moving, clicking it till it connects at the front. Now if you look at the cockpit, a couple things to note. Notice it has cargo that's innate. So this is where you get some of your initial cargo space. It has hull, but also 2 crew stations. You will also notice these slightly different attach points that are not like the aero door attach points. So here, for example, you could add weapons. And that's why they look slightly different here. Not everything's going to be legal. So if you mouse over and hit G, you're going to notice the only categories that pop up are weapons. Now next, you may want to consider and upping your crew station limit. With this setup here, you can equip 2 crew stations. But remember, you can get up to 3 on a beginner ship. So we can look at an option to add 1 more. So what we can do here is, again, let's go ahead and look at this middle area. Hit G. As we saw, you're going to need a minimum 2x1 to add the crew station. So go ahead and move over your different options until you get one that has a crew station. In this case, here's a galactic computer core. That's one of the thematic ways. Let's go ahead and add that. So now with this setup, you'll notice we have a total of 3 crew stations, which will cover you for the beginning and mid game. You're also going to have room for 4 passengers, which will cover the majority of transport missions potentially. We only have 240 base cargo right now, and we're going to want to up that. Now your base ship already came with one option. It comes with this specific ballast cargo hold, which is meant to kind of go on the end cap. And for all intents and purposes, you can add that in this setup and it's perfect. This will give you a total of 450 cargo capacity. Now let's say you want to add some additional cargo to your ship. You want more than just the 240 plus the 210 here. In that case, what you can do is you can either mouse over, as we did before, to find legal attachments for a specific area, or let me show you the alternate way of adding items. You can mouse over anywhere out in the middle of space and hit G, and now you actually have access to all categories. and it's going to show you a lot more cargo options. Why is this important? It's because if you look here, if we're looking at all options, there's a ton of options here. You may not have access to all this at the beginning of the game. That's okay. But the reason I bring this up is if you mouse over a specific area and hit G, not all of them will fit that spot. So in this case, it only fits 3 different areas, and that may confuse you as a beginner. So instead, let's go ahead and go in the middle of space. Let's hit G. If you're not at the cargo category, make sure you go between Q and T to get there. Now again, as you mouse over here, notice that the descriptors on the left. The cargo amount will change, the health may change, the value will change, but the biggest thing here is mass, and some of them are going to require certain skills, mainly starship design a lot of times. Now I want to point out that the cargo holds are going to be the heaviest components of your build most likely. They're very, very heavy, so it's not easy to bring that up. So keep that in mind. The more cargo holds you add, the bigger engines you need, etc., the less mobile you're going to be. So you want to keep everything kind of in balance. Some of these can be absolutely gigantic, like this galleon, 1200 cargo. Notice it requires starship design 2, but it's got mass 252. That's not too smart. But you could, for example, add an extra 210 for 44 mass. They're also going to look different. So notice this kind of design versus something a little smaller, like this. Now let's say you want to be a little more conservative and you're just starting out. You can pick something like the Caravel V101 cargo hold, 48 mass, 225 cargo. Go ahead and select that, click on it or hit E. Now it's out in space. At this point, what you can do is again maneuver around, click and drag it, and it will show you any legal areas where you can connect. In this case, these can kind of connect to the side of your designs. So very simply put, go ahead and place it where you see fit. I'll use this example here. Remember, if you're struggling to place them vertically, you can always use R and F to move up and down to get them placed. So here, if you wanted to go up one, go ahead and go R. Or if you want to get to the bottom, you just hit F. So you get close to that and it's going to snap to the right point. But we're going to go ahead and put it here. So now you notice you have 675 cargo, but also your mass is now up to 420 before adding engines or anything else. So let's keep it like this. Now the next thing we need to add is a reactor, and let's take a look at the reactor stats. Now if you look to the left to the reactor I have here, the big things you want to look at is Class A. Class A is the smallest size of reactor, and you don't need any skills to get this, so do be careful. There are Class B and C reactors that will require piloting to be rank 3 or 4. Power generated is how much power it adds for your entire design. The higher the better. Repair rate is how quickly your ship and ship parts are going to repair. Reactor health is how much health the actual reactor has as a component. So if enemies target your reactor, how long will it survive? Hull health is big. You'll notice this has 355 hull. That's the majority of our hull strength. So interestingly enough, a big portion of how big and tough your ship is will depend on your hull. And crew capacity tells you how many crew members it will require to basically fully utilize the reactor. So if you have 3 crew members, well, one of them is going to technically automatically be assigned to get the most out of this reactor. Now do note you can only have 1 reactor on a ship. So you can either use the one that the ship came with, or again, you can pick a location. It doesn't matter where it is, but aesthetically, we're just gonna put it kind of hidden towards the back here. Again, mouse over, hit G, go to the reactor center, and again, there's gonna be a variety of brands. Here's a giant one, but this is a C reactor. So this is meant for the biggest ships. Here's one that requires a specific piloting and starship design. It doesn't necessarily have the highest power generation, but what makes this one unique is it has a huge hull amount. So they're all different. Not only do they look different, but they have different balances of power and features. For starters, I recommend getting the reactor of the highest power generated amount for an A that you can afford. In this example, I'm going to keep this torpedoidal reactor, and we're going to go ahead and just put it here directly above our cargo hold. Now the next required item is going to be a grav drive. And we can use the same exact strategy of either utilizing the one we had or selecting a legal spot, hitting G, and going over to grav drive to pick the style and type you want. Again, they will go from class A, B, and C. Now stat-wise, on the left, is going to tell you what class it is. Max power is how much power you have to put into that grav drive to get the mass effect. Do note, simply to jump from system to system, you only have to put 1 power into it at any given time. By putting more power into it temporarily, it's just going to make it so you can jump faster, which is good if you need to get away from bad guys or the law if you're a criminal, etc. What's more important here is going to be grav jump thrust. The higher this, the better your jump range is going to be. And also, heavier ships may require a more powerful grav drive. So if you try and put a class A grav drive with a grav jump thrust of 12, but you made this behemoth ship that's got a bunch of class C components, you're not going to be able to legally utilize that. And actually the system will tell you there's going to be errors that would pop up. But for now, for all intents and purposes, again, select the best A1 that has a nice grav jump thrust. That's going to be the most important thing. We're going to go ahead and keep the one that we had here, which is fine. And again, I'm putting it right on top of the generator here. Now next we need to add one more engine. Now engine stats, if you look at here, it's going to have a class again. Max power is how much power needs to be assigned to the engines to get the max speed out of it. So when you're flying out and about, you can have a certain amount of engines, but if you don't max out your engine, you're not going to get the full thrust. So let's say your max speed is 150 as equipped, but you only put 50% of your engine allocation. Well, your max speed may only be 75, for example. With that being said, if you want to make a design legal so you can finish it, you need to make sure you have enough engine thrust. So if you look at the stats below max power, you have engine thrust, maneuverability, maneuvering thrust. Again, the higher number that is, the more maneuverable and agile your ship's going to be. And of course, you do have engine health in case anybody targets it. The higher this number, the more resistant your engine's going to be, and how much it adds for hull, and then also how much crew capacity is required. So for example, you could equip 4 of these theoretically, and it would take 1 crew member to manage all 4 of those. And I think kind of thematically, it means like maintenance. Now in this case, I'm going to go ahead and attach one to the left. And do note, you do not need to be aesthetic with this. You could keep the same ones as I'm doing here. You could also hit Z, and this would flip it. So if you want to have a different setup and put it on the left, and notice now they're facing a different direction, you could do that. As long as it's a legal position that's green, even if it looks silly, like having 2 engines back to back, it will still work just fine. So for this example, we're again just going to equip the 2 we have here. Now do note, because of the fact that we have some extra weight on this setup right now, our mobility is in red. This doesn't mean right now that the ship is illegal, but it's going to be a little less agile. So when you're flying around, it might not be quite as nimble. You could fix this by taking off one of your cargo modules. That's the easiest thing. Or you can add extra engines. Or you can keep it the same and just realize your ship's not going to be quite as mobile. Now next, we want to add some landing gears. And again, we can either utilize the ones that the ship came with, and you'll notice it came with 4 different ones baseline. And these, if you mouse over them, notice there's a new stat that's called lander thrust. This is important because sometimes you get an error that your ship is too heavy and it can't take off, for example. Well, by adding extra landing gear and adding this lander thrust, as you add those up, it can actually help compensate for that. Now, if you don't like this specific design, again, you can mouse over a legal spot and hit G. Go under gears and you can see the different options. Now in this case, there's only a Deimos landing one and a Nova Galactic. Except interestingly enough, the Deimos one is heavier, has more mass, which is not necessarily a good thing, and it costs a little less. Or you can get the Nova Galactic that has better landing gear and has 2 mass, but it costs 100 more value. Mass is king here, so you would definitely want that one. But again, we have 4 of these that are already coming with the ship. So what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to equip this one here. We're going to have to put the front one here. We're going to flip around and install all 4 of them. And again, it's very important when you mouse over, it is green. So if this was too high, for example, or too low and it's red, you need to use just F and R to get it to the right level. Now next, in order for a ship to be legal, you need to have a docker. A docker is where you're going to connect from your ship to a ship station, for example, anytime you're out in space, or if you're going to dock against an enemy. And there are different types of dockers. The one we have here by default is a top docker, and you can go ahead and quite literally bring it over. I'm going to hit R to go higher, and we're going to put it on top like this. But also, if you wanted a different type, you can go ahead and mouse over legally, hit G, and now you can have a slim docker that just goes right on top. A top docker, as we saw, by a different brand, or the one you have here. Other brands may have side dockers as well. Now do note, this has to be put on the highest point. So here, it should be fine if you hit C for flight check. Make sure there's no ship errors of that. But let's say if we put it lower, like this, and then if you put additional modules on top here, physically, you wouldn't be able to connect. Which makes total common sense, and I'm glad they do it this way. But just note that it has to be the highest point. So this is perfectly legal. This is perfectly legal. But if you messed with it and did this and put other elements on top, it will no longer be legal. Now do note the flight checkpoint, which again is C, is good to check to see what kind of errors you need to fix before this can be a legal ship. Unattached modules make sense because we separate a lot of components. Ignore that for now. But it will also give you very important things that are not necessarily required, but would be a good idea to include, including missing shields. So we're definitely going to be adding that. And then we also need to get fuel. Now here is the fuel tank that I have currently. Now, very important, it'll tell you here again the mass, the hull, and also your grav jump fuel. This is important because if you want to make multiple jumps in a row, you need to have enough fuel for it. Otherwise, you're going to have to kind of pit stop in a location and refuel, quote unquote. Now, you don't manually refuel. You don't have to land and get fuel. It's going to kind of automatically refuel you, but this is more of a quality of life element. If you want to make big, long jumps, you got to have enough fuel for this. Also, if you make one singular really long jump, you need to make sure this is covered. Something like this that has 160 grav jump fuel is perfectly fine for a beginning setup. You don't need anything super crazy or fancy. So again, you can either use the one that the game gives you, which is a slightly different one, or let's again pick a location, hit G, go to fuel tank and find one that's appropriate. These are by no means expensive, so find one that's good for you. I believe you start the game with something like this, like 50. The mass is 10. Do keep that in mind. And some of them will require Starship designs that are kind of more efficient. So again, pick one that you want. If you're trying to stay nimble, keep it light. This one here we have is moderately heavy, 21, but it's got great range on it. So we're gonna go ahead and just equip this. Now again, I'm moving it to this side, so make sure you hit Z and it will flip it. And let's attach it a little lower here. Again, aesthetically, I'm making it the opposite side of this cargo hold, but again, you don't necessarily have to set it up exactly like that. Next, we do want to add shields. So let's go ahead and just select anywhere randomly, hit G, and let's go over to shields, tabbing over. Now shields, like other items, are going to have a class. So you're going to start with class A's. And just like other key elements, they're all going to have a max power requirement. So this most basic one, you need to add 3 power towards shields to get that 310 max health out of it. And some of these obviously will go up, but they'll also require more max power. So do remember the more you put into shields, the less you have for weapons and other systems. So in this case, we'll go ahead and pick kind of like a middle ground for this setup. And so we'll do 4 max power for 355 shielding here. Also, it has a stat of regenerate. This is how quickly it's going to regen. Additional hull strength, and this requires the equivalent of a half a crew member to maintain this. So go ahead and select that. And then you want to go ahead and install it. Do note, there's less legal spots for this. Normally they're on top for this design. So we're going to go ahead and go R. And we can either put it up front here, but we'll go ahead and put it in the back on top of our engines. Kind of looks nice aesthetically there. On top of the grav drive rather. Now the final functional thing that we're going to consider here are going to be weapons. Okay. Now it's going to use the same format. Your ship is already going to come with some weapons baseline. And for the most part, there's going to be different categories of weapons. You're going to have laser weapons that are good against shields, ballistic weapons that are going to be good against armor, hull damage basically. You can have EM weapons that are good at disabling ships, missiles, and also turrets. Early on, you're not going to really find that many turrets around. And the way you equip weapons is going to be the same as other elements. So here are the 2 weapons I have on the ship currently. So I can go ahead and click and drag that, and when you do, it'll highlight legal areas. So here, I'll put one on the left here, and I'll auto-equip. If I want to do a different setup, I can mouse over one of the legal positions and hit G. It'll go straight to weapons, and maybe I want to put on a totally different kind of weapon on here. Now do note that when it comes to the statistics of weapons, they will not have a category that tells you, hey, this is a laser weapon, this is ballistic, this is an EM weapon. Which is kind of frustrating, but some of the brands will give it away. And also you can kind of look at it and look at the naming and it'll help you out. So a cannon or autocannon is likely to be a ballistic weapon. When it comes to the statistics, of course we have class. Range is literally meters, I believe, the range of the weapon. So the higher, the sooner you can engage. The fire rate and the damage. Again, the higher the fire rate, the faster the weapon is. Unfortunately, these do not give you like a DPS, damage per second calculation. So sometimes you may see a higher number for hull damage or shield damage, but if the fire rate is slow, that's not great. Also do note, in order to get max efficiency of weapons, you have to max out the amount of energy allocation. So if you equip a bunch of weapons but don't have the energy from your reactor for them, you may, for example, shoot a gun once and it's going to have to recharge because you're not applying too much energy to them. Max power will tell you how much you have to put energy-wise in order to get the most out of each of these weapons. And then hull is how much health it adds, not going to be much. Now do note, even though there are 3 categories of weapons, you do not have to use or equip all 3. These are just options. Now in this example, I'm going to go ahead and put 2 matching weapons on the left and right, just because I want to be aesthetic here. So they will both go to this first category. Now the way you assign what weapons go to what category is you hit C for flight check and go over to the tab that says weapons. And notice here we have things auto selected. We happen to have a cannon that we have that the ship came with, a missile launcher, and then I have these auto electron beams that I had installed. You can left click and change it. So you could, for example, have this unassigned, and now all of a sudden you can't even fire with left click on this. The only reason you would do this if you kind of wanted to set up a design like this, and you don't want to accidentally put power towards it because maybe you're only at the time using the other 2 weapons, so you could do that. But for the most part, you want to make sure to assign this. But very easily, I could have my left click be the missile launcher instead, or the cannon. It does not matter. Set up however you want. Again, W0 is going to be left click by default. The W1 is going to be your right click. And then your third button, I have it custom designed, but whatever your third attack is, you can see it under your key bindings. That's going to be the third one. Now again, if I had deleted these, they wouldn't be here. But let's say we purchased these and now we want to install them. Now, as I mentioned, anytime you select anything, it's going to show you legal locations for them. And we're running out of spots here. We can have one that's underneath the ship or underneath the cockpit, but we may want to add other options here, which is going to bring us to another category of building. And those are going to be structural components. Your starter ship is going to come with this Nova cowling. And by definition, this doesn't seem like anything that special. But if you mouse over it, notice it has mounting points for weapons. So in this case, we could very easily move this over, click and drag, bring it back here, it's going to auto attack. Aesthetically it looks nice, but now other weapons have mounting points. So as an example, let's say that we want this ballistic cannon on here. You could apply it to the front, or you can move it to one of the sides. Since we only have one of them, let's put it like this, just for now. But what about this second setup? Well, we can put it on one of these mount points that we have left over, but let's look at one other way you can get a different type of mount point. Let's go ahead and mouse over one of these areas and we'll hit G. And then go under structural, and you'll notice at the very top, you're going to have horizontal weapon mounts. You can quite literally put that on any of these spots, and now it becomes a legal mounting point. So here, you can have it go on top, or you can have it go on bottom. Again, aesthetically, it's just going to differ slightly. But let's say you want to look a little fancier. Well, there's other ways too. Remember, in general, structural pieces are there for looks, but they will sometimes have secondary effects like weapon mounts. So here's a Deimos wing, and there's two different variants of that. But let's go all the way to the bottom. Let's keep it with the Nova theme here. There's a Nova wing, and you can see right off the bat, there's going to be multiple mount points. So let's go ahead and put one on there. And now we have this cool little wing. And we can put it up front here if we want. And now all of a sudden, we can put the missile launcher here or here. Let's put it on the side like that. And again, this is purely aesthetics, but let's say we want to do another one of those. Now selected, notice it's facing the wrong way, so hit Z. And when there's more than two selections, you'll notice you can keep hitting Z until it faces the right direction. So we went just like that. Now let's say you want to do another missile. Do note, you're going to want to make sure you match the weapons, because you can only have a total of 3 different types of weapons here. So if you want to add another missile, you're going to need to make sure you get the ATLANTIS 27A missile launcher. So you can do it a couple of different ways. You can select this one right here, hold Control, and then hit G to duplicate. And notice that automatically picks the right one. And then attach it. Of course, you could also just select the mount, hit G, and go down the list, but that just can take longer. Now at this point, you can add any other structural effects you want. Some of them are purely cosmetic. And if you go into advanced designs, you can get really, really fancy as you expand your ship to look really nice and cool. But that's completely optional. Notice they're not going to have a lot of mass, so you can quite literally have a pretty big ship from structural pieces, and it's still going to be almost as nimble as a ship that is quite a bit smaller, because remember, most of your weight is going to be coming from the engines and especially the cargo holds. Now, in this design here, I purposefully did something that would create an error for you guys. Notice we have error 1 here. If you hit C, it's going to tell you what the issue is. The issue is that there's an invalid Docker module position. It has to be the outside edge of the ship. So what can we do? Well, the fix is easy. We simply have to move this wing and gun. So it's going to let me show you another feature. If you hold Control and left click, it will allow you to highlight multiple pieces of the ship. In this case, we made sure that whatever's highlighted red gets moved together, which is going to be this piece and the missiles. Let go of Control, and now when you click and drag, it's going to move together. We move the wing back here. Same here. Click this. Now notice by default, it selected anything else connected to it. However, if you had selected this, you could then select the wing also. And now they will move together. We will now go ahead and move the Docker, because again, it needs to kind of be at the highest, widest kind of point. I'm going to move it up here. And then again, we're going to use Control left click, to select this and move everything back one. And now we have a legal design. Now, of course, you could have alternatively filled in that spot with something if you wanted a different aesthetic look. You could use a different type of docker to make it look a little flatter. Now, do note that at this point, this ship is completely legal. If you go flight check, there's no red warnings, but it does say low mobility. Now, in this case, you notice you have really high missile strength, but it does put extra pressure on your reactor, so it messes with some of your ratios, for example. And your total equip power is 26. Your reactor power here is 18. So you cannot have everything maxed out. What can you do for this? Well, the simple solutions would be, first of all, to remove one of the weapon systems, because you're not probably going to utilize all of it. So I could delete one of these. All of a sudden, that's going to drop it a little less as far as your equipment power. You're only -5. Your mobility is still kind of low, but again, this is not horrible. It's just not high. You can function with this no problem, but really in this particular case, in order to get your mobility up higher, you would have to get more engines or more powerful engines, which you may or may not be willing to do. So you either deal with a less mobile ship, or you can, for example, just sacrifice some cargo space. You can mouse over one of these, delete them. All of a sudden, your top speed is now 150, your mobility is 80, which is fine. Just have less cargo space. We'll go ahead and delete this weapon mount since you don't need it right now. And again, to optimize things functionally, you could very easily move this gun to the side. We could move this missile rack, since we're not using the two on the sides, bring it to here. Now that's nice and efficient. And either move this around for looks. You could even delete this. In fact, to keep the mass down, I know it's only one mass, but you could delete both of these. And from a functioning standpoint, you're going to notice now it says nominal. Nominal, there are no error systems. You're mobile enough, your mass ratio is good, your jump range is good. Again, your whole shield and cargo, even though it says red, it's fine. This is very similar to your starting ship setup. It's not easy to get your shields higher. Remember, you either have to get more efficient shields through technology. There is also a skill that will let you increase your shielding by 20, 40, or 60%. That could be useful. Same with your cargo capacity. You can get a skill for cargo capacity that's going to increase this up to 50%. And max crew right now, even though it says red, don't worry about this, because at the beginning of the game, you only can have a max crew equipped of 3. So anything above that is redundant until you get a ton of points into social. You have to put a minimum of 11 points in the social skill tree before you can get this up to 4 even. Alright guys, I also wanted to cover painting your ship, and I do apologize, this is an addendum after my initial recording. This is why I'm showing this on a different ship. So if you want to paint anything, you can either select one piece by left clicking it, or if you want to select multiple things, hold Control and click on anything where you want to change its color. And then once selected, go ahead and hit J on PC, and it has the full color options here. You'll notice there'll be between 1, 2, or 3 different potential colors to change. You can also adjust the saturation and brightness. Your most recently used colors will also be shown. So let's say you want to change one of the colors. Let's select color 2 here. This is going to change this yellow one here, it looks like. You can go ahead and move this over and it'll change lives. You can make it blue, you can make it green, whatever it may be. And using this method, you can color whatever you want. Don't forget, if you don't like what you did, you could always go Control and Z, and it's gonna take back the last effect you did. Now, once you're ready to leave, go ahead and hit Tab. It's gonna ask you whether you wanna accept this. If you are happy with the cost and design, go ahead, hit Enter, and magically, it's now going to be your ship out here. If you did find this video helpful, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and as always, thank you for all your support, and I'll see you guys in the next video.